Morning Year 2s and welcome to your first day of maths for this week. We're going to be building on what you were doing last week, learning a little bit more about how to tell the time. But this week we're going to be looking at how to tell the time to the nearest 5 minutes. Now, Mr. Clutterbuck very briefly introduced this on Friday, and some of you may have started to figure out how it is you're able to do this. For lots of us, though, this may have felt like quite a challenge. It's a really tricky concept, a really tricky idea, and it's one we're really challenging you with. But for the next 3 days, we're going to spend some time trying to understand why or how a clock works and how we read the time to the nearest 5 minutes, slowly building up our understanding so we can feel confident to have a go at doing this. You'll be surprised just how much your brain is going to stretch and grow because you're going to be so challenged this week. So let's get started by having a look at our slides together so we can think a little bit deeper and a little bit further about our understanding of time. Now, last week, when looking at time, we started to learn to tell the time focusing on 4 particular numbers when we were looking at minutes. So here is my clock face. We know clock faces are round. We know they have 12 numbers from 1 to 12. We know they have hands on them as well. Not hands like you and I, but those arrows that point to numbers. Now, last week, we were reading times of all sorts, but the minute hand only ever pointed to 4 numbers, the 12, the 3, the 6, or the 9. Those were the only numbers you were really focusing on last week when looking at that long minute hand. And you were learning last week that each of these can be said in a different way when the minute hand is pointing to them. One of them represents quarter past. One of them represents o'clock. One of them represents half past, and one of them represents quarter to. I wonder if you could pause the video here and try and match each of those words up to the correct number on the clock face. Once you've had a go, I will then share this with you as well. So pause the video now to have a look. So, the first one you might all have remembered, and one we looked at back in year 1 and one we feel quite confident with, is probably the o'clock, which is when the minute hand is pointing to the 12. Oh, look at this, the hands on this clock face. The hour hand's pointing to the 2, the minute hand is pointing to the 12. It must be 2 o'clock. So the 12 means o'clock. The next one we all feel quite comfortable with is half past. Now, the reason this is half past at the bottom where the number 6 is because if we were to take our clock face and let's imagine we were to chop it in half, this circle in half, we've done fractions before, we would reach the number 6. It is halfway past the hour we have begun. So when the minute hand points to the 6, it's half past. Now, we've got to think about which of these is quarter past and which of them is quarter to. The reason they're to do with quarters is because if I were to have split my clock into quarters like I've done now, we would go through the 3 and the 9. Past is usually on the right-hand side of the clock as we go past the 12. 2 is usually on our way back to the 12. So, which number do you think is quarter past? That one is in fact the number 3. This means quarter past. So through process of elimination, quarter to must be the 9. Now, when we are talking about the time and the minute hand is pointing to those are the common words we often use. But they actually represent a certain number of minutes. For example, when it is o'clock, this means we are no minutes into the hour. It's 0 minutes. Now, I wonder if you know how many minutes are in an entire hour. If you thought there were 60 minutes in an entire hour, you would be correct. It takes 60 minutes for a minute hand to get from the 12 all the way back around to the 12 again. 60 whole minutes makes 1 hour. So if there were 60 minutes in 1 hour, how many minutes would be in half of an hour? So we need to find half of 60. Well, if you don't know what half of 60 is, do you know what half of 6 is? I would hope we know that 6 can be shared into 2 lots of 3. So if half of 6 is 3, half of 60 must be 30. Therefore, half past usually represents 30 minutes. At quarter past, this would be 15 minutes. And at quarter to, well done if you already thought this, it would be 45 minutes. You might remember writing the time last week as things like 12:15, 6:30, 7:45, because o'clock, quarter past, half past and quarter to are just simply other ways of saying these number of minutes using our fractions knowledge and our knowledge about the time and the clock having 60 minutes in an hour. But today we're going to learn how we read the time when a minute hand points to any of the other numbers that we haven't yet looked at. And it's actually a lot more simple than it sounds. So we have just said the 12 means 0 minutes. The 3 means 15 minutes. The 6 means 30 minutes. And we know that the 9 means 45 minutes. Now, I wonder if you would like to pause the video here and have a think if there's anything you notice about the numbers on the clock. How did we get to 15? What do we count in 3 times to get to 15? What do we count in 6 times to get to 30? What do we count in 9 times to get to 45? I might not make much sense at the moment, but some of you might have some light bulbs going off in your heads because you have some times table number fact knowledge in your head already. Pause the video and just see if you can notice a relationship between the numbers. Now, some of you might have noticed another clue when I set that challenge, because at the top of the screen I have written, let's practice counting in 5s. Now, let's just do that around the clock and see what happens as we make our way around. Let's start at the 12 as 0. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55. Notice that as we counted around in 5s, we said the numbers that we have already written around the outside of the clock face. So when we're looking at the minute hand, we are going to be thinking about how it counts in multiples of 5 around a clock face. Let's count in 5s one more time as we go around the clock, and I will add the numbers around the outside. 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, well done for counting with me, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and then we would get back around to our 0 here. We don't say 60 when we get back around on the clock face to the number 12. So when the minute hand moves around the clock face, each time it points to a number, it represents a multiple of 5 minutes. The 1 represents 5 minutes, 2 represents 10 minutes, 8 represents 40 minutes. I wonder, what does the 4 represent? How many minutes would that be? It must be 20 minutes because 4 lots of 5 makes 20. If I count in 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20, when I get to the 4, I've said the number 20. What does the 10 represent in minutes? It represents 50 minutes because 10 times 5 makes 50. We're going to use this idea of counting in fives to help us read the time to the nearest 5 minutes. You may notice that this clock face only has one hand. I've only drawn the minute hand on this clock face because we just want to practice for now counting in fives to find out how many minutes are being shown on a clock face. We're not going to be looking at the hour to begin with. So, what did I have to count in around the clock face to calculate the number of minutes? Did I count in ones? Did I count in twos? What did I count in? Fives. We need to count in fives. Now we know that 12 always is our 0. So we start counting in fives at the number 1. Let's do that and see what we get to when we reach number 2. 0, 5. What's this one? It must be 10. So if we counted in fives, 5, 10, when the minute hand points to a 2, it means 10 minutes after. Can you say that with me? 10 minutes after. When the minute hand points to the 10, it means when it points to the 2, it means 10 minutes after, because 2 times 5 is 10. 2 lots of 5 minutes have passed. So, if we're counting in fives around the clock face, how many minutes after would the 7 represent? Maybe pause the video and then we'll do it together. So, we've got our 0 here. Let's start counting in fives until we reach the 7. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, 35 minutes. The 7 must represent 35 minutes after. Let's see if we were right. Yes, it must be 35 minutes after something o'clock. We don't know what o'clock it is yet because we haven't got our hour hand. Remember, we're practicing reading the number of minutes today. What about this one? How many minutes would the 5 represent? How many minutes after? What number is going to go here? We know it's not just 5 minutes. We need to count in fives. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. It must be 25 minutes after something o'clock. And when we write that as our digital time, our minutes always go last. So you're going to see some of this today later on in your workbook pages. What about this one? The minute hand is pointing to the 8. How many minutes does the 8 represent? Can you count in fives on your clock face as you pause the video and then we will come together? So we know we've got 0 here. Let's count in fives and see if you were right. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. The 8 represents 40 minutes after the hour. It is something 40. It's 40 minutes past a certain hour in the day. Some of you might be counting around in fives like I am every time. Others of you may be using number facts you know. Maybe you already know 8 times 5 really quickly in your head. Having strong number facts like that can make this a little bit easier. Some of you might have remembered that the 6 represents 30 and just counted on in fives from there. 30, 35, 40. As long as you're all figuring out that the 8 represents 40, you're doing the right thing. Oh, this time I've included an hour hand. But notice how today I have told you what hour we are in because we're just focusing on minutes today. So we know it's so many minutes after 3 o'clock. Let's look at our minute hand. Remember, that's the longest one. How many minutes does the number 5 represent? Let's count around that clock. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. It must be 25 minutes after 3 o'clock. The time must be 3, 25. Can you see how reading the time to the nearest 5 minutes is actually much simpler than it seemed? Once we understand that that long minute hand counts in fives, it becomes much easier. What time might this one be? Pause the video and talk to someone at home. Where is that minute hand? How many minutes is it representing? Well, the minute hand is the longer one. I can see it here pointing to a 1. And I know that when I count in fives, the first number I say is 5. So it must be 5 minutes after 6 o'clock. Now, whenever it's 5 minutes, we don't simply just write the number 5 onto our digital time. We have to put a 0 before it. That's the only number where we'll write it slightly differently to how we'd usually see it. Because when we're writing time, all minutes need 10s and 1s, and there are no 10s in the number 5. So that 0 holds it in place. Can you have a go at reading the time for this one? Pause the video and talk about it at home. How are you going to find out how many minutes there are on this time? Hopefully you counted around the clock in your multiples of 5. I actually already know that 10 lots of 5 are 50. I know the 10 will be 50 minutes, and 5 more than 50 would be 55. So I know that it's 55 minutes after 8 o'clock. We can always check that by counting around the clock face in fives. Here's our 0, 5, 10, count with me, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55. I was right. It is 55 minutes after 8 o'clock. So it must be 8:55. Now, for your independent learning today, there are a few different activities on your worksheet. Your first one, you're reminding yourself about how we count in fives when we're looking at minutes around the clock face. You're going to write the numbers around the outside as you count in fives. Remember, the 12 is 0. What number goes next to each of these digits on the clock face? How many minutes do they each represent? Then your first one is to match the clock to the however many minutes after on the other side. They only have minute hands, so all we care about is you finding out how many minutes the 5 represents. Can you find the right answer over here? And then the same for the other clock faces. This one, you need to fill in the gaps. It looks harder because there's 2 hands, but remember, we're only focusing on the minute hand today, the longest hand. I have done all of the work on the hour hand for you. So find that long hand. The minute hand is pointing to the what? Well, on this one, we can see what number it's pointing to. You're going to write that here. Then you're going to count in multiples to see how many minutes that represents. It's pointing to the 1, but that doesn't mean it's 1 minute after 12. How many minutes does the 1 really mean? That's what you write on this line, and then again here. If you're really finding this manageable today and wanting to challenge yourself that little bit further, the final thing you have is adding the minute hand to the clock face. I've drawn the hour hand. You need to draw that longer minute hand to show me how many minutes I've written in blue and underlined. So if you need to show 5 minutes, where are you going to draw your minute hand? Which number would it point to? I would count around the clock face in fives, and wherever you say the number 5, that's where you need to draw your hand pointing to. Remember, you might not get through all of those activities in your maths lesson. You know, at school, we always all start on the first page. We spend the same amount of time doing the learning all together. And the more confident we are, the further through we will get. If you don't get through every challenge, don't panic, because we're going to go over it again today. It's a really tricky idea, a really tricky thing to understand. So please don't panic if you're finding it a little bit wobbly, or you're feeling like you're in the learning pit. Be a persevering turtle, a bounce back kangaroo, and aim high today so that your brains can grow the most they possibly can. And then I'll see you tomorrow when we'll have a look at telling the time to 5 minutes that little bit more, with a slightly extra challenge of also having to look at the hour hand too. Take care, Year 2s, and I'll see you soon. Bye.